And one of the things that we've seen recently is just that a lot of games, whether it's League of Legends for PC or Clash of Clans on mobile, have been being operated for many, many years, as being alluded to, forever franchises. And I think we've also seen quite recently, when Supercell focused on Brawl Stars with Live Ops, that the revenue for that game from December to January increased by 6x. And so to speak on the impact of AI to Live Ops, which to me is the most interesting application of AI, we have our esteemed panel here. So let me actually introduce these guys. First, we have the living legend, Alan Adham. Alan is co-founder and former chief design officer at possibly one of the greatest game companies in the world, Blizzard. We also have, I'm going to skip you some to Travis. Travis is CEO at Carbonated, mobile and PC gaming studio that you guys just announced your game recently, right? Like in the last couple of weeks. So make sure you check that out, Mad World. But Travis has been a senior executive at major companies such as Mattel, Jamdat, EA, and Zynga. And I would have to say, of all the game CEOs that I know, Travis is the guy who has been working with a lot of AI tools and actively doing stuff in his game. So that's been awesome. We also have, just to skip to Tim for a minute, Tim Hong is head of live service games business development for AWS Games. But he also has extensive production and live ops experience, having worked at EA, Blizzard, and at Unity prior to joining Amazon. Now coming back to Troy Kirwin, Troy, investment partner at Andreessen Horowitz, where he invests in tech tools, infrastructure, and AI for games. Troy also previously led corporate strategy and development initiatives at Unity and advised large media clients on M&A at Jefferies. And finally, we've got Solomon Ruiz-Lichter, Senior Director of Global Gaming at, quite honestly, my favorite customer engagement and analytics platform, Clevertap. Solomon leads strategy for Clevertap Gaming, which is their little marketing here, purpose-built solution for game studios that unifies live ops, remote config, and CRM. Solomon has had a long career in go-to-market strategy for enterprise SaaS companies in MarTech and joined Clevertap by way of their acquisition of Leanplum. All right, so let's jump right into it. The first question I have is, I would say over the past 5 years, I personally have been seeing the application of AI. It's been kind of like in the shadows, but for very specific purposes, whether it's for balancing the economy, for content generation like Match 3 games, for sales and merchandising and doing personalized offers and things of that nature. But it has been fairly specialized. But since ChatGPT in particular, there's been this massive influx of new startups and the possibility of applying AI to live ops. And so what I wanted to ask the group here is just in terms of how you have seen AI applied in whether it's game development or live ops in the past. Could you describe what you have seen and what will be the change post-ChatGPT? What change do you expect with all of the kind of movement and activity in AI? And maybe we could start with you, Alan, and just kind of move down.
Sure. Well, first, as the original game director of World of Warcraft, thank you for the compliment, Bing. I play Horde, by the way. That might be me that's killing you and your Alliance friends. I know there's a lot of focus right now on generative AI for building the games and making the games, and I think that's amazing. I know my co-panelists are going to talk a little bit about that, so I'll speak at a high level, and then I'll talk about some of the things that are really beneficial use cases for running the games. One is that at Blizzard, what we found over the years, the promise of generative AI is amazing, because you would have seen we're challenged over the last, at Blizzard. The success of our games is both a wonderful boon, but it's a curse at the same time. Striking a balance between adding content to a live game and at the same time working on the next thing has turned out to be very difficult for us. So whether it's World of Warcraft or Overwatch or Hearthstone, we shipped World of Warcraft with 60 developers. That team today is 600. We shipped Hearthstone with maybe 50. That team at its peak was closer to 200. And Overwatch we shipped with about 85, and that team today is closer to 600. And so the promise of generative AI to help create live content might allow us then the unlock to get some of those developers working on the next thing much faster. So that's a huge solve for us. The details of that I'm going to let my co-panelists talk about. But for us at Blizzard, one of the biggest challenges we face today is if you're successful making a game, is operating it means dealing with toxicity. Player toxicity is a big problem today. And we're finding the promise of AI tools for the first time. Now, in the past, we could monitor text, and we could apply whitelists and blacklists, and we could look for bad words, and we have behind the scenes. But what we couldn't do is monitor speech, and speech is much more damaging. And so our Global Insights group has done studies on this, and we know that players who are the direct recipient of toxic hate speech, think of the worst things you can think of, and people say them online much more frequently than they would say them in real life. About 1 out of 10 games you can expect, or sessions, whether it's a session-based game, or you can expect to hear the worst thing that you would ever hear. We know those people have much higher quit rates, so it's damaging to the business. The interesting thing in that study showed that even if you're not the direct recipient of toxic hate speech, you're also much more likely to quit. So even if you're on the other team, it's just not a healthy environment, and it's currently unmoderated, and there's no practical way to do it. So ChatGPT, speech to text, that's one really, really promising avenue. And we could talk about that alone for hours, how you could potentially do that at reasonable cost. There are tools out there that are starting to scratch the surface of it. Pairing that with your customer support, with your player reporters, the good ones, and the bad ones, by the way. Player reporting is weaponized. We call it brigading. Sometimes you'll find organized groups mass reporting somebody to get them banned incorrectly. That's a huge problem for us in our customer support group, because we have to go through all of that. So that's just one small aspect. The other one is botting. Botting is a huge problem for all of us. And it's even more of a problem in free-to-play now, because you're not able to charge a box as an entry price. So when you catch a botter, at least in a premium product, they've given you $60 or $70. So in a free-to-play product, they're sucking bandwidth, they're wasting CPU cycles, they're disrupting the game. And so there are tools coming there, detecting bots in real time. And then user acquisition fraud is another huge problem. So from my perspective, AI has a huge potential to help us in all those realms, and I'm extremely excited about it.
Thank you, Alan. That was awesome. First, I want to say, I don't think JK had an intro, so I want to introduce JK, without whom all of these amazing people would not be on this panel. JK is the founder of Game Makers, who many of you listen to. It's a really famous podcast out in the gaming world, and he did a bunch of amazing stuff. He was an SVP over at Sega. He's now running Lila Games. So we've known JK for quite some time, and I just want to thank you for being a part of this first. Can we get a round of applause for JK, please, everybody?
Thank you. I'm embarrassed, but I appreciate it.
We got to appreciate the moderator. So from my perspective, I'm on the game tech side, right? So I'm not a game maker. We make technology that game makers use, right, to drive engagement and live ops and configure games. It's not as much about we're doing some cool stuff with generative, but the stuff that we've been focused on for a long time is just ML, right? And our ML over years, it's not just us, a lot of there's other providers in the space that do it. It's gotten kind of incrementally better and better in small bursts, kind of cycles over the course of the last few years, because I think publishers and game makers and studios have access to so much gaming, player telemetry data, behavioral events, event attributes, event properties, player attributes, all the kind of cross section of historical and in-game session data based on what the player's doing, the player state, the game state, all that kind of thing. And so what we've seen and what we're focused on here at Clevertap Gaming are vertical models, right? Effectively is what we're focused on from an AI perspective in as it relates to ML in gaming. And I think we've seen vertical models in e-commerce, we've seen vertical models in fintech, we've seen vertical models in media. It's hard to build a vertical model in gaming, and I'm using a very SaaS vendory term that maybe a lot of you guys don't know. It's industry models, right? And it's kind of breaking everything into broad industries. But gaming's not like that. Every single game in genre has its own specific business. It's very nuanced. And so in order to, depending on the progression mechanics and the players and how long they stay and the core loop of the game, so how do you build a model that intuitively gets smarter and smarter to predict how to drive better engagement. And at the end of the day, what are we trying to do? We're trying to drive deeper relationships with our players. How do you do that, right? And so from our perspective, it's all ML. We see generative as an amazing tool that not only we can use, but obviously studios can use it to ramp up and accelerate production. And I think there's excitement and giddiness and concerns around that, and we'll chat about it a little bit. But from our perspective, we're very focused on ML and how we can drive better models to engage, to enable our customers to better engage with and monetize their players. One of the coolest things that I've seen out in the market is, I'm not going to say the publisher, but I know a large top 10 publisher that is basically built really deep ML, machine learning, kind of self-learning algos to basically tune their pricing, packaging strategy, and in terms of their dynamic pricing, which player gets what specific offer, and then kind of predicting the players that are liable to convert with new kind of offers that the ML conceives of. From my perspective, generative is awesome. We're going to talk a lot about that, but the ML alone, ever since the advent of the GPU and accelerated computing, all of these things are kind of pushing, it's like the rising tide that kind of sinks all, or raises all boats kind of thing.
Cool. So I'll jump in there. So we're Carbonated. We're a small studio, about 25 folks, venture funded, and Andreessen Bitcraft and the Come To Us folks are back in the company. The way to think about us, we have a game on top and a live ops platform on the bottom. And the live ops platform has enabled us to kind of grab onto a lot of the generative AI stuff that's shown up. So I'll give you guys a couple real examples. And I'll use a framework that Zynga had since Bing was up here talking. They had this framework called Reach, Retention, and Revenue, where Reach was really about getting customers excited through surprise and delight to install your game and play it, retaining them by giving them content to master, and then revenue, although I'll say that's more margin these days because generative AI is quite good at cost reduction. So on the Reach side, we're doing stuff with 11 Labs and OpenAI where when the player installs a game, look at who they are, we have them give us their name, and then through 11 Labs, the game speaks to them fluently, right? And also in the appropriate language. So if they're in Brazil, it says it in Portuguese, if they're in English. And that's really exciting for players who typically don't get to experience games in their native language that speak it fluently for them. So that's a way that we're using it today, sort of to surprise and delight customers. We test this stuff, we sort of secretly test it behind the scenes, putting this into the app stores. And while I think in industry, this is all pretty sort of familiar stuff. Oh yeah, you can use 11 Labs to have characters speak to you. But when we put this out in the wild, and we had a guy in Detroit who we actually watched him play the game, and it blew his mind. Just blew his mind. Never heard about it. Couldn't imagine the game was talking directly to him fluently and knew where he was. He was saying, hey, Bill from Detroit, you got to survive this world. It just blew his mind. So on the Reach side, it's a way for smaller studios to compete by creating compelling, interesting things that surprise customers and draw them in. So essentially lowering CPI. On the retention side, we're using generative AI. In our game, we have this global map where we have 300,000 hexes of all over the world, and we use generative AI to write backstories for every plot of land everywhere on Earth. And so if you're playing in Sao Paulo and you install the game, it's going to say, hey, Carlos from Sao Paulo. But if you check your region, it's going to have backstories for all the plots of land that have local landmarks in them written in Portuguese. And then when the games, the clans battle each other and change the story of the game, we rerun that and we re-update all of the content. And so that content is fresh and new and gives players more interesting things to master. So that's an example. We're doing about 12 different things, but that's an example on the retention side of creating more content and have it customized for those players. On the revenue, or again, margin side, trying to reduce costs. As a small studio, we can't compete with the big guys, so we're trying to find clever ways to reduce costs. And I'll give you one interesting example, which I think is a little mundane, but to me is super exciting and blows my mind as a long timer in the games business. We figured out a really simple way to have the game auto-localize itself, self-localizes. How do we do that? I'll go simple version. We essentially have something like a spreadsheet, an OR file with all of the the fields of the text in the game that we would normally send out to localization, and we just have ChatGPT look for diffs whenever through the Live Ops team we add a new button or a new field or a new menu or anything. It checks it, it localizes it. We do some clever stuff about context to make sure it understands what it's localizing. We can give it constraints to say localize within this size, and the game self-localizes as we do Live Ops. And that's a significant cost reduction that allows us to compete with the bigger companies who have huge armies of people that can localize these games globally. We're a 25-person studio, and our game is auto-localizing itself in real time while we work on it. And that's a small thing, but pretty crazy stuff that you have a game that self-localizes. So those are just some examples. We're doing some fun stuff with Convey, where we have AI characters, and we're using for marketing, top of the funnel. We're doing a bunch of other stuff. But I think being backed by folks like Andreessen and Bitcraft and others have given us the capability to experiment, but we have to be able to compete with the big guys. So it's a blessing, and I think we're super excited to be able to hopefully catch the wave of generative AI to make more compelling games for customers, give them more content to play, and keep costs down at the same time.
Awesome. Yeah, it's no secret to anyone in this room that the LTV to CAC equation has gotten out of whack in the last couple of years with changes to ATT and IDFA, and the fact that there are more games now than ever, and that's only going to increase in the next couple of years with AI. And so, the things that I think about are how can we rewrite that equation or solve, decrease CAC and increase retention for games using AI and Gen AI specifically. And so in the case of CAC, how can we make marketing much more personalized, whether it's ad creative generation that are, uniquely personalized one-to-one based on contextual data from devices, from in-game context, from based on location, localized to the culture that you sit in, et cetera, which can decrease CPIs. And then on the other side of the equation, thinking about LTV, things like toxicity, of course, increase retention. Things like if you're a smaller studio, having the bandwidth and the ammunition to release new content. We see games like Pal World and BattleBit come out of nowhere, but what's the D60 on those games when they run through the content treadmill? And so allowing smaller studios to be able to compete with the big boys with small teams and release new content refreshes. So yeah, these are the things that we're excited about for small teams to be able to compete.
Hey y'all. So what I get excited about is when I think about my days when I was at EA, and I would be having pancakes with my kids, and then shit would go bananas, and I would have to hop on and essentially try to fix and figure out what went wrong. And the way I think about AI in this case is three pillars, really. There is the automation layer, which could be like dumb pipes, but they repeat things. There's the AI, which I think of as the governance portion of this. And then there's the ML part of this, which essentially can learn over time context. And that's what we're really searching for. So I think contextual automation would make everybody's life in this room a lot better and a lot easier. And I think that we see incredible efficiency gains when we talk about scaling. And I think that I'm a believer not in Skynet, but what I am a believer in is that the computer model and the ML is going to know better than what I know to give my players over time, especially when it's on the individual level. So I think that it's applying all these different pieces together and not just saying, hey, there's just one use case here. I think the one thing that I think really kicked off this discussion was it's my belief that in the next 5 to 7 years, and a lot of these guys say even sooner, that a lot of the work that we end up doing from a workflow perspective becomes contextually automated. And it's like giving you a power drill instead of a screwdriver so that you can answer the fundamental question of, is my game doing well for these users, and what does good look like? And I think that combining these three things together allows us to get to a point of scaling that is going to let you have more pancakes with your kids. So, yeah.
All right, thanks. The next question I wanted to ask actually is about a topic that you kind of touched upon, Troy, which is like the enablement of live ops for smaller teams. You mentioned Pal World. Certainly, there's small dev teams like Lethal, Valheim, these BattleBit guys, who have created these games but may not necessarily have the bandwidth to deliver great live ops experiences for their players. And I mentioned Supercell, which has famously gone through a very dramatic structural shift in terms of team size, right? And so they used to be famous for having teams of smaller than 10, and now they have purposely been more intentional about bigger teams to be able to focus more on live ops. But now with AI, I kind of have a two-part question. How do you guys imagine the impact to like these small teams, the enablement of these small teams to access more live ops capabilities? And then if you guys could name the single specific application or use case that you think is going to be first or most impactful for these teams, I'd love to hear your thoughts. And we can go in order. You guys want to jump in? Or Alan, you want to jump in here?
Sure, I'll start. Now, we're a big company today with big teams, but our DNA, and we still think of ourselves at Blizzard as small teams. We started small, we still think small. We try to develop small and then scale into success, but as I touched on, striking that balance between making something successful and continuing to run it in live ops and working on the next new thing has been really, really challenging for us. And then add on top of that, dev cycles at 6 and 7 years and huge dev teams. So the promise from our perspective of being able to shrink our team sizes, get in a time machine and go back in time to when things were so simple and so much fun. The other thing that we see in our industry today that we would love to get back to is all the product innovation. We've already talked about the teams up here, but things like Helldivers, Minecraft, PUBG, most of the innovative things in our industry have come from smaller teams on smaller budgets and tighter dev cycles because they can take those risks. We would love to be able to get back to thinking small and acting small and taking those risks again. So for us as a big company, the promise of getting small is huge. In terms of what would most allow us to get back to smaller teams, the thing that I'm most excited about is the generative AI applied to game-ready 3D models. So roughly half of our teams, you'll find, are in the 3D model pipeline, whether it's building the mesh, concepting the art for starters, building the mesh, rigging the mesh, topology, animation. It's a pipeline of artists now that it takes us hundreds of those. And by the way, when I talk about 400 or 500 or 600 person teams, I'm not even counting the outsourcers that we use. Add on top of that another 100 or 200 outsourcers, almost all of whom are art. And so that's what I'm most excited about.
Great. Solomon?
Yeah, I think generative in particular is such a game changer for mid to small size studios. I mean, we talk about this all the time at Clevertap, right? This concept of democratization of live ops execution. And when we talk about it, the context is just, hey, let's push that downstream to non-technical business users. So game teams, product teams, live ops teams can maybe configure elements of the game. Generally can't do that without some kind of back-end system, right? But talk about democratization. I mean, it's going to enable small studios, mid-sized studios to punch above their weight class because everyone I talk to right now in this game is resource strapped. Everyone is resource constrained. It doesn't matter if you're mid-sized. It doesn't matter if you're small. It doesn't even matter if you're large, right? Everyone's trying to do more with less. We are out of the market of excess. I think you came up with this concept. So good. We are now in the market of efficiency. That's where we are right now. And if you're a mid-sized studio or a small studio or a pre-launch studio, you're feeling that more than anyone else. And so generative is going to enable you to compete with the big folks. Now, the counterpoint to that is, well, yeah, but the big folks will just have an army of people, building all kinds of really cool AI. And so I think that's true, particularly with orgs, like Blizzard, who think small and execute that way. But not all the big folks are that agile. And there's a lot of security and privacy issues when it comes into large language models. I had customers preemptively reaching out to us when all this stuff kind of broke, like, hey, are you guys using any generative AI in your products? Just on the security side, on the data privacy side. And so I think smaller, mid-sized, pre-public companies and studios don't have to deal with that, right? This is going to enable them to be more operationally efficient and more agile and double, triple, quadruple, whatever it is, event production rates and content production rates on the live ops side. One of the cool things that we've kind of thought about is because we don't just think about, we obviously think about how can we make this, how can we enable our customers to make more money and build deeper relationships with their players, but it's also how can we continue to make this operationally efficient and easy to use for our users, right? That's you guys, right? And so this concept of like generative playbooks, right? Everyone who needs to do live ops, like the baseline of things you learn throughout your career, this kind of tribal knowledge or your scar tissue, basically what to do, right? And what if you didn't have to skill people up that way? What if you had playbooks that could create themselves based on genre, based on game, based on assets, based on whatever it is about the game that you could feed that model to spit out a playbook for a live ops manager. That's the power, I think, the beauty and the promise of generative. It's not just production work and limiting staff work. It's also making all you folks much more efficient. So I'd say my answer, and I'm sticking to this for anyone in midsize or small SMB studios, generative is going to be huge. We're going to talk about this later, but this is going to enable you to compete in a really volatile and challenging market, in my opinion.
Rolling along. I'm also a Horde player, by the way. Yeah, since I already talked about the game, I won't go through that again. I do think you're sort of touching on a topic we talked about a little bit in the green room, which is this idea that I don't think people are going to really be replaced by AI, but you're going to be replaced by people that can use AI. And I think so for our company, we're pretty strict about having everybody use it across the board. And since we talked about game a little bit, I'll talk about say like our concept artist, or if you're in the non-game making side, I would say the business side of it. When we have, let's say, an HR problem, we will dump Slack into a form where we can have ChatGPT run through it and give us information or sensitivity analysis on what all the employees are doing. And that's much cheaper and faster than hiring an HR team or having an HR outsourcer. So you can do stuff like that on that side. From the concept artist side, we have all of our concept artists using various tools that do that kind of stuff as a requirement, because we know that they've got to get good at it, because if they don't, that's going to be a real challenge for them in their careers going down the road, and leaving hopefully whatever happens to Carbonated, when these employees move on, they're going to be able to 10x any other concept artist because they've been playing and getting familiar with these tools. God, there's so many places we use it. We use it all over the place. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, our role is ultimately to create cool games for players and use AI to do it and reduce cost anywhere we can. And we don't do it just on the game side. We do it on the business side, the finance side. The way that I think about it is right now AI can manipulate any kind of text. So if you do text in anything you do, there's ways you can use it. If you do any kind of math, there's ways to use it. If you do any kind of coding, there's ways to use it. If you do any kind of image work whatsoever, there's ways to use it. If you're doing any kind of audio dialogue, there's ways to use it, and there's ways to combine these things together. So if you're touching anything that's text, image, audio, or math, there's ways to use it. So for what that's worth.
Now you got me worried about my Slacks.
We use it for Slack. It manipulates text. Here's another cool thing that we do. Whenever we do play tests, whether we use something like a playtest cloud or we use any kind of other service, and we pull down all that data, run it all through, have it generate all the information that we need, and you can get a depth of analysis that you just simply can't get through any other means, and it's extremely fast. So yeah, almost anything you can imagine that you can use text with. So feedback from players. You can take the audio files, and I have a really hacky version that I do. You can do stuff like Otter AI, but I actually just play the audio into my iPhone and have it dump to a notes pad, take the notes pad, dump it into ChatGPT and analyze it, and you can pull any meeting or audio notes in that way really quickly with almost no cost. So there's a lot of clever things you can do to just operate on a daily basis, leveraging these tools to keep costs down and go fast.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating how if you look back over the last 20 years of the games industry, as Alan said, small teams, teams the size of 60 that have grown to 600, and what that's looked like in terms of the makeup of these teams. And you've gone from more generalists to specialists throughout the production cycle. From you now have job titles that are like environment artist and lighting designer and VFX designer and sound designer, texture painter, rigger, animator. You can go on and on and on. And I think as we think about these tools going from highly specialized to much more generalized with the power of AI, I think everyone will become much more creative generalists rather than the specialization that we see, which will enable those small teams to to have, to punch way above their weight and be able to innovate in ways that were not possible before, except with these large budgets. And so it's great to work with small teams within startups that are innovating in a way where the large guys face innovators' dilemma of how they are going to adopt and change the team structure to accommodate all the changes that we're seeing in the pipeline and the efficiency within studios.
Yeah, I like what you said, Troy. I mean, there truly is an innovator's dilemma, and I think there's another elephant in the room, which is you don't want to look stupid and say you don't know what you're doing with AI, but the vast reality is that a lot of us don't, right? Like, you're still trying to figure out the indemnification challenges, like Solomon mentioned. You're trying to figure out, like, well, how do I leverage it? Like, Travis and his company is definitely leading the way, but I don't think most studios are like that. So I think it's one of those things that Pandora is out of the box in a good way, and this is, like, personally me, I think when people say live service, right, like it's a terrible thing. I don't really buy that. Like, what I buy is the fact that when I was a kid and I played games, the box game I got was the game that I got. What live service is now is that it is a tool that can be leveraged to make a game better, even if it's a single-player game like Spider-Man and they decide to do New Game Plus or something like that. So I think it's one of those things where we can't just throw AI at a game and say, AI it. I mean, maybe we get to that point, right? We start getting quick prototype games like that. But essentially, if the biggest challenge to the industry is development costs, and we now have a stick of dynamite that allows us to generate content at a massive pace, then I think we're going to see some really interesting efficiency gains, for sure. But I think there's a whole new genre of things that could happen. What happens if there are truly UGC-based games where you just let your players wild? Roblox on steroids or something like that. I don't know. But I think that's where we see the true innovation, and I think that large teams can learn from our smaller teams that are innovative to do that. And that's usually what happens in our industry. So what use case? I'm not sure. That's up to you guys to go figure out and convince your stakeholders to invest in. So, yeah.
All right, I've got one more question before opening it up to the audience, but I think some people believe that this AI revolution and this technology innovation that we're seeing is potentially as big or even larger than the internet. And we may be in a very rare moment in time. And as we've seen with other technology shifts, that in these rare moments in time, there are going to be big winners and losers. And so the kind of the big question I have for you guys is, and just to try to make it practical for our audience, how do we prepare? And so whether it's to be that AI-enabled employee, or at the company level, how should companies prepare strategically or tactically to get ready for what's coming? You can either answer at the employee level or at the company level, but in terms of the bigger question of how do people in the audience prepare for what's coming for this potentially extremely rare moment in time so that we don't, as Eminem would say, don't let this moment slip. What do people do? Alan?
Yeah, so the phrase has already been mentioned. I gave a talk at Blizzard in front of 400 designers, a sort of survey of all the tools that are coming. And I was in the talk neutral on AI. And the call to action was for us all to put our heads together and figure out team by team the right way to deploy AI. And I would say maybe 10% of the designers and others who heard about the talk, including the New York Times, took, in the case of the New York Times, thank God, they took only a slightly negative stance. In the case of our employees, there were about 10% that DM'd me with comments about how we are complicit in the end of mankind. And so that's the extreme sort of end of it. And then the more reasonable perspective is this is going to cause a lot of people to lose their jobs. In Blizzard's case, I don't think that that's true, not in the foreseeable future anyway, because we have so many ideas that we would execute if we had the resources to. And this might allow us to take a team, split it in half, and make a second game, as opposed to laying anybody off, right? And so the gentle or not so gentle message back to those folks is look, this is here. realistically, we're going to use it where it makes sense ethically and legally. And the phrase about, it's not the AI that's going to take your job, it's the person sitting next to you that's 10x faster than you are and better that's going to take your job. Because at the end of the day, we serve our players, and our goal is to make the best games possible for our players, and ideally many of them, and thrill and delight. And if AI helps us do that, then one day, hopefully many years from now, I'll look back on my life and have brought even more joy to players around the world, and that feels pretty amazing. And so, my message to people who are still on the fence about AI tooling at the individual level and at the corporate level is this is coming, and if you want to be relevant in a few years, maybe even faster than that, learn to use AI.
Yeah, I mean, Alan pretty much said it all right there. The way I would put it in perspective is, I heard this stat the other day from my buddy Rory, who I work with at Clevertap on the other side of the business, the non-gaming side. He told me 5% of the American public knows how to create a prompt for a generative AI product. So it shows you how nascent this all is. Obviously, most people in this room, I could reasonably believe. We're getting the hurry up the music here. But most people in this room, I could reasonably believe know how to do a prompt and are pretty skilled up on AI. It's our industry, it's where we live, all those sorts of things. But I'll zoom out and go macro. I think it's a societal thing that's going to change. Like my daughter, a couple years ago, I might have told her, or I thought maybe she'd learn Python or something like that in school. Now I think she needs to learn how to use AI. So it's a societal change that has to happen. And if you're in this market right now, if you're in gaming, you have to you don't embrace this. You dive in. Because if you're not, someone is, and they're probably, I hate to sound dire, but they're probably coming for your job. This is the reality of the market that we're all in. And so it's going to spawn new jobs. There's going to be AI teams. There's going to be heads of AI. And I think it's going to radically change the way studios and publishers operate at both the tactical and a strategic level. But ultimately, it's going to drive huge efficiency. But it starts in society because, again, 5% of people know how to make a prompt. So, exciting stuff. Travis?
I'll go super quick. I'll try to brighten it up a little bit because I feel like I'm all sort of like, I think it's awesome. Part of the reason why we do, I'll try to be more happy because I'm like, why am I so down on this? It's awesome. Our company embraced it the way we did because it's awesome. Like as a game maker, I've been making games since the late '80s. I'm an old timer, and I've never felt so empowered as I do now. I'm like, you can go into ChatGPT and create scripts. You can go into 11 Labs and have a character do dialogue. You can do come to connect with Convey and have characters talking in 10 minutes. You want to create a cool image, you can go to Midjourney and generate it. It's such an awesome time to be a game maker and to have access to these tools. And then in the hands of these artists and the creators, it's even 10x. They can do so much more cool stuff. So part of the reason we jumped into it was, one, is from a competitive standpoint, but two, just because it's kind of awesome. I'm definitely a techno optimist and love new tools and love new tech. That's how I've stayed in games as old as I am. I've been doing this. If I stopped picking up new technology, I'd been dead back in the Philips CDI or PlayStation 1. So I love new technology. It keeps me relevant, keeps me excited. So I love this stuff. And I think it's one of the coolest times to be a games maker or a content creator because you can do everything. And you can do it so fast and you can do it so cheap. So I think it's awesome, and that's kind of my hopefully optimistic perspective on this space.
Yeah, and just quickly, every technology shift that the games industry has seen has expanded the industry, has expanded the types of games that are made, the genre, and AI is just the beginning of that. It's going to enable completely new types of games that were never possible before. Games where the game design is all around conversing and conniving and forming packs and with AI NPCs, and so there's so many opportunities that are going to expand the industry, create more jobs, and allow more people to be game designers.
The only thing I'll add is look at the players. I would be very interested in players being able to use the same tools we're using to do their awesome fanfic, whatever, new ending of The Last of Us 2 or something instead. I think there's a whole way for us to look back at all the content that's already been generated for the last 20, 30, 40 years and say, well, what do we do with this now? So everything they said, plus watch your players and see what they do, because I think they're going to be the ones who kind of set the pace for all of us to kind of keep up with.
Maybe one comment I can add is just remember, guys, that with AI, the rate of innovation is exponential. So it's not like other technologies. I think you really have to pay attention very closely and very quickly with this. And with that, do we have time for an audience question, or how are we doing on time? We're wrapping up. Okay, sorry guys, but grab these guys and ask them your questions directly.
Ask in person here. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.